February 2026. Bill Gates is now America's largest private farmland owner, and farmers across the country are in open rebellion. Gates controls over 275,000 acres of prime farmland across 19 states, land that's been family-owned for generations. But now, those families are tenants, paying rent on land their grandfathers owned. Rural communities are rising up, state legislatures passing emergency laws, farmers organizing protests, because they're watching family farms get converted into rental properties for the richest man in America. The farmland empire, over 275,000 acres of farmland, strategic acquisition of the most productive land in America. In Louisiana, Gates owns over 69,000 acres, prime farmland growing rice, soybeans, corn, and cotton. In Nebraska, over 20,000 acres in the Sandhills region, cattle country, rangeland, and irrigated cropland. In Arkansas, over 47,000 acres, Delta farmland, multi-generational farms converted to Gates-owned properties. In North Dakota, over 16,000 acres purchased through intermediary companies. The purchases created such controversy that the Attorney General investigated whether they violated state corporate farming laws. These aren't small hobby farms. These are massive commercial operations that anchor rural economies, provide jobs, support entire communities, and they're all owned by Bill Gates now. The rebellion begins. January 2026. Gates's farmland company, Cascade Investment, announced plans to purchase an additional 18,000 acres in eastern Nebraska and western Iowa. Local farmers organized immediately. Within days, protests formed at county courthouses. Farm groups mobilized. State legislators got flooded with calls. Tom Richardson farms 2,400 acres in Story County, Iowa. His neighbor sold 3,800 acres to Cascade Investment in December 2025. Tom watched the transaction destroy a family farm that had operated since 1898. My neighbor's kids didn't want to farm. I get that. But they sold to Bill Gates instead of to local farmers who would have kept it a family operation. Now it's owned by a billionaire in Seattle who's never planted a seed in his life. That land is gone from family farming forever. The rebellion isn't about jealousy. It's about structure. When Gates buys farmland, he fundamentally changes rural land ownership patterns. Family farms become tenant operations. Local ownership becomes absentee billionaire control. The tenant-farmer reality. Here's what happens after Gates purchases farmland. The land gets leased back to farmers, often the same families who used to own it. Marcus Webb's family farmed 4,200 acres in western Iowa for 4 generations. Financial pressure from crop losses in 2024 and 2025 forced them to sell. Cascade Investment purchased the entire operation in October 2025. Now Marcus farms the same land, but he's a tenant, paying rent to Gates's investment company. I work the same fields my great-grandfather broke. I farm the same acres my family has farmed since 1910, but now I pay rent to Bill Gates. I'm not a farmer anymore. I'm a tenant. There's a difference. The psychological impact is devastating. Farmers who owned land become renters. Families who controlled their operations become tenants, subject to lease terms set by distant investors. Sarah Mitchell farms 2,900 acres in Arkansas. Her family sold 1,800 acres to Cascade Investment in 2024 after back-to-back loss years made debt unsustainable. We kept 1,100 acres we own free and clear. We lease back the 1,800 acres we sold to Gates. Every rent check I write feels like failure. Like we lost something that can never be recovered. My grandfather would be devastated. This pattern repeats across every region where Gates owns farmland. Land ownership shifts from local farmers to a billionaire's investment portfolio. The strategic purchases. Gates's farmland purchases aren't random. They target specific types of operations in specific regions. Prime cropland with irrigation, land with water rights, farms with access to transportation infrastructure. In Louisiana's Tensas Parish, Cascade Investment purchased multiple rice and soybean farms between 2018 and 2022. Over 15,000 acres of prime Delta farmland with irrigation infrastructure already installed. In Nebraska's Holt County, purchases focused on ranches with water access, land that controls grazing rights and water resources across large territories. In Arkansas's Mississippi County, Acquisitions targeted cotton and soybean ground near river transportation, land that can move crops efficiently to export terminals. James Holland, a land appraiser in Arkansas, reviewed several Cascade investment purchases. These aren't speculative buys. This is strategic acquisition of the most productive farmland in America. Land that will appreciate, land with water, land with infrastructure. This is portfolio management at the highest level. The North Dakota controversy. North Dakota became the center of the Farmland Rebellion in 2023. Cascade Investment purchased over 2,100 acres of prime potato farmland through Red River Trust, a subsidiary company. The purchase violated North Dakota's corporate farming law. The law restricts corporations and limited liability companies from owning farmland, designed specifically to prevent corporate consolidation of agriculture. The North Dakota Attorney General investigated. Local farmers organized protests at the state capitol. State legislators held emergency hearings. The controversy revealed something critical. Gates's farmland purchases often use complex corporate structures. Trusts, limited liability companies, holding companies. Structures designed to navigate or circumvent state restrictions on corporate farmland ownership. Doug Peterson, a fifth-generation farmer in the Red River Valley, testified at legislative hearings. Bill Gates using legal loopholes to buy North Dakota farmland is exactly what our corporate farming law was designed to prevent. If we let billionaires exploit technicalities to accumulate our farmland, the law means nothing. Eventually, facing political and legal pressure, Cascade Investment sold the North Dakota land in late 2023. But the episode confirmed farmers' suspicions about sophisticated legal structures being used to accumulate farmland at restricted scales. The state legislative response. The Farmland Rebellion is creating political action. State legislatures across the Midwest and South are responding with emergency legislation. Iowa legislators introduced a bill in January 2026 restricting non-resident ownership of farmland. The bill would limit purchases by individuals or entities not residing in Iowa to 320 acres. State Senator Tommy Williams sponsors the legislation. Bill Gates, owning 250,000 acres of American farmland, should concern everyone. This isn't about farming. This is about financial investment. And when farmland becomes an investment vehicle for billionaires, family farmers can't compete. Nebraska's legislature is considering similar restrictions. A proposed law introduced in January 2026 would cap out-of-state farmland purchases at 640 acres and require demonstrated agricultural experience. Arkansas reviewed its corporate farming statutes in late 2025. State legislators proposed amendments closing loopholes that allow farmland accumulation by non-agricultural investors. Louisiana, South Dakota, and Missouri are all reviewing their farmland ownership laws, each state wrestling with the same question. Should billionaires be allowed to accumulate hundreds of thousands of acres of productive farmland? The local opposition. County governments are fighting back, using zoning laws, land use restrictions, and agricultural preservation ordinances to block Gates's farmland purchases. In Nebraska, 2 counties passed emergency ordinances in late 2025, requiring agricultural experience and residency for large land purchases, exceeding 1,000 acres. In Iowa, county boards and agricultural regions established right of first refusal policies in January 2026. Local farmers get priority to purchase farmland when it comes up for sale. Robert Chen serves on a county board in Iowa. His county passed a right of first refusal ordinance in January 2026. Bill Gates, buying our farmland and converting family operations to tenant farms, destroys our communities. We'll use every legal tool we have to stop billionaires from consolidating our farmland. The financial reality. Here's why Gates is buying farmland, and why farmers can't compete. Farmland has appreciated consistently for decades. Prime Midwest cropland that sold for $3,000 per acre in 2000 now trades for $8,000 to $12,000 per acre in many regions. For billionaire investors, farmland offers stable returns, inflation protection, and portfolio diversification. It generates rental income while appreciating in value. For farmers, Land is fundamentally different. It's the foundation of their operation, their legacy, their family's future. When farmers compete against billionaire investors to purchase land, they lose every time. Tom Richardson tried to purchase his neighbor's 3,800 acres when it came up for sale in November 2025. I offered $7.8 million, fair market value based on recent sales. I had financing arranged. Then Cascade Investment offered $8.4 million cash, with no contingencies. I couldn't compete. No farmer could compete with that. Cash purchases, no financing contingencies, quick closes. Above market offers. That's what farmers face when competing against Gates for farmland. The rent escalation concern. Farmers leasing land from Gates face another concern. Rent escalation over time. Current rental rates are based on historical county averages. But Gates's company has no obligation to maintain those rates long term. In several Iowa counties where Cascade Investment owns significant acreage, rental rates increased modestly when leases renewed in 2025. Marcus Webb is farming land he used to own, now leased from Gates. His lease expires in December 2027. I'm already worried about renewal. What if they raise rent to levels I can't afford? Do I walk away from land my family farmed for 4 generations? Or do I pay whatever they demand and lose money farming? I'm a tenant. They own the land. This is the fundamental insecurity of tenant farming. No equity, no control, no guarantee of long-term access. The community impact. When farmland ownership shifts from local families to absentee billionaire investors, communities suffer. Family farmers live in their communities, shop locally, support schools, serve on boards. Their success is tied to community success. Absentee landlords extract rent, the profits leave the community, flow to investment portfolios in distant cities, don't circulate through the local economy. Rachel Morrison operates a farm supply store in rural Iowa. She's watched the transition as more farms sold to Cascade Investment. When family farms get purchased by Gates and converted to tenant operations, we lose customers. The rent money leaves our community, goes to Seattle, doesn't get spent at our store. When enough farms convert to tenant operations, our town dies. Schools lose enrollment, Main Street businesses close, local institutions struggle as the economic base shrinks. The January 2026 protests. The rebellion intensified dramatically in January 2026 when Cascade Investment announced plans for additional 18,000-acre purchases. Local farmers organized protests within 48 hours. County courthouses saw demonstrations, state capitals in Lincoln and Des Moines saw farmer rallies. Tom Richardson participated in a protest at the Iowa State Capitol on January 18, 2026. Over 400 farmers attended. We're not protesting success. We're protesting the consolidation of farmland into the hands of billionaires who view our communities as investment opportunities. When Bill Gates buys 18,000 more acres, that's 20 to 30 family farms that become tenant operations. That's wrong. The protests created substantial political pressure. Iowa's governor acknowledged the concerns publicly. State legislators accelerated consideration of farmland restriction bills. The Gates response. Gates has addressed the farmland purchases in limited media interviews. His explanation centers on sustainable agriculture and climate-friendly farming practices. Farmers aren't convinced. James Holland. Gates says he's promoting sustainable agriculture. But sustainable for who? Not for the families who lost their farms, not for the communities watching local ownership disappear. Sustainable for his investment portfolio, maybe. The sustainable agriculture messaging frustrates farmers because it dismisses their concerns about land ownership structure. The issue isn't farming practices. It's who owns the land and what that means for rural America. The withdrawal. In late January 2026, Cascade Investment quietly withdrew from 2 pending farmland purchases in Iowa. The transactions, totaling approximately 3,400 acres, were under contract but hadn't closed. Local opposition made the purchases politically and legally complicated. Cascade withdrew rather than fight through the opposition. That's significant. Gates's investment company doesn't usually retreat because of local protests. The farmland rebellion created pressure that changed the calculation. Tom Richardson. When they withdrew from those Iowa purchases, we knew the protests worked. If we organize, if we fight, we can stop some of these acquisitions. The final truth: a farmer writes a rent check to Bill Gates for land their family owned for 4 generations. A family sells to Cascade Investment because they can't compete with cash offers. A small town watches another farm convert to billionaire tenant operation. Bill Gates owns over 275,000 acres of American farmland. Farmers are rebelling, state legislatures are acting, local governments are fighting. This isn't over. Leave a comment below. Should billionaires be allowed to own hundreds of thousands of acres of American farmland? And hit subscribe because this fight is escalating.